What's up, everybody? This is yogurt and granola thoughts. I didn't make my overnight oats this week. I found actually with the homemade yogurt that the bacteria cultures are so lively that it will start to ferment by day 4 or 5. So I think I just need to make it up and add the yogurt the night before. Anyway, something I was thinking about is especially for younger people and so much of like our anxiety and our depression and our worries about the world. um I think a lot is pretty, it makes a lot of sense. Like, that's definitely a mind space that I find myself in a lot. There's things like collapse is a subreddit that has really grown in the last few years. Just, I think with COVID, like, people started to realize how much the systems were broken. And I've talked about the epistemological crisis that we're currently in, and that has to do with just a lot of um yeah, institutions being shown to be failing us and not prepared for the world ahead. And then also just a lot of like science and a lot of signs that we're in for a bumpy ride with climate change and global instability and pandemic and disease and all those things. And it's very overwhelming. It's a lot. It's truly an existential crisis. And young people feel it the most because we've been inundated. Like, I've known about how bad climate change is my entire life. And then it's just things have been getting worse. You hear people talking about how we're in the worst timeline, and it's just overwhelming, and it's a lot. But I find comfort not in these things. Like, I like read the all the articles about how bad things are, and I feel like I'm not a person who just wants to look away. Like, I get comfort from information seeking and just knowing straight up what's going on. um, but I can definitely get pretty sad and despondent and worry about the future and worry about collapse and all these things that might happen and have already been happening and we don't respond to. Um, and so I think that's like a bit of doomerism. I don't know. People who are more online probably know that. And at this point, more people know about it. It is interesting, though. I feel like a lot of conversations that are now more mainstream start on the internet, like, well beyond. And so doomerism is just like the future's fucked and just a very nihilistic worldview. And sometimes it turns into like nihilistic fascism, and that's in like the more 4chan variety. And that's like a lot of people get radicalized by those things. And that's also, I think, why we have such a problem with like right wing stuff. And like Republicans generally are talking about how bad things are and how America's a shithole and how there's all this pain and suffering, and they ascribe it to the completely wrong reasons, and they basically don't have a good power analysis and just scapegoat the people they don't like, minorities and such. Um, but there's kind of like a chintzy fake positivity and just like not talking about the hard things that I have a critique of, like moderate centrist Democrats or people. A lot of them will be like, oh yes, all these problems are so bad, climate change is so bad, the way we treat undocumented people is so bad, blah blah blah. But the solutions they usually go with either just kind of help the problem a little bit, or they just talk about it but don't actually do anything to help. And so, I mean, I think the iconic example of that is like that picture of Nancy Pelosi and the other lawmakers kneeling in the, was it a kente cloth? I don't know exactly if that was, but in response to the Black Lives Matter protests, but then now just like totally doing a face turn, and it just being like an aesthetic. They say what their values are, but they're not working towards liberation. And so that is very, I think that's one of the reasons people hate the Democrats so much, is because if you're just talking about how bad things are, and then when you have the opportunity to change and to stand up for justice, you don't do it. It's pretty shitty. Just look at the rail workers strike right now, just to know that at the end of the day, the moderate Democrats are agents of capital and the bosses. Anywho, this is all to say, I definitely feel I'm not very optimistic about the future of things, and I know things are going to get rough, and it does really make me sad a lot of times. But also, I know that these historical forces and political and economic forces are out of our control in so many ways. And it's important to keep in perspective of what I have control over and just thinking about what I really value and what I need. And so a lot of this art and a lot of the fun I have and just trying to um, really focus on friendships and food and relaxed vibes and good times and sharing out this art and just spreading the love as much as I can is because, for one, times are times are hard for everyone. Like, we really got to be there for each other. But also, I spend so much time worrying and stressing and reading the news and keeping informed that it is like such an important it's very important for me just to be able to be active in fighting against that. And so I do worry sometimes about the, like, is my social media presence too light and happy and carefree, and I'm giving like a false view of what life is. And there's lots of times I'm like super anxious, and lots of times I do not feel good. But if my social media is just all the happy, good, fun stuff, does that just make people feel bad because they think my life's so amazing? But I don't think that's actually how people perceive me. That's just my anxiety brain talking. Oh, anyway, this is also gonna be a cold room podcast, I guess, because I just have it all together. So listen to Ones and Twos. It's by Adam Tooze. I think he's an economic historian, left wing. He's really brilliant, and he kind of talks about all this stuff. He calls it the poly crisis, and that's basically like things are so complex, and there's so many escalating issues and crises that it's really hard to point to any one thing as the cause. So talk about like supply chain issues. There's so many things going on there, and climate change and COVID. And so it's really hard to, it feels so uneasy because there's so many things going on. We're just inundated with it. But I think it's nice to remember that framework and just to think about things that way, because like, yeah, it's a bumpy ride. And so we just got to hold on to each other. We got to keep in mind that regardless of the bumps, like, we're still here to go on it. In quarantine, I watched a lot of like Great Depression documentaries, because it's like, okay, what do people do when things get really fucking bad? And there is like a lot of disruption that can happen and people's lives get upturned, and that's happening these days. I mean, the increasing like houselessness problem, and just people being economically eviscerated and thrown into poverty. Like, this has happened before in history, and now it's homeless people are seen with like vitriol and hatred. But when you look at the history books, you think of Hoovervilles, and it's the presidents who's blamed for the problem rather than the people who are victimized by the systems. Anyway, this is all to say, listen to Ones and Twos. It's Adam Tooze's podcast. It's really fascinating, and it's really well done, and he's just a brilliant guy. Wow, I've been talking for a long time. I need to take a sip of water. All right, bye. I wonder if that made any sense at all. It probably did, because people say it does, but I do not have that confidence in myself all the time. Woo! Okay, bye.